Welcome back, everybody. In this second part of the social psychology class, we're going to be talking about both a very intriguing and extremely controversial area that social psychologists have endeavored to study over the last couple of years. To understand this particular idea, what I'd like to do is, again, another tiny activity. What I want you to do is look at the three pictures in front of you. What I want you to do is try to figure out, and if some of you have never encountered these events on your own, what would be appropriate in each of these situations. So if you're a fan in the bottom left-hand corner of the band that's playing, what are you supposed to do at that particular event? How are you supposed to behave? After that, I want you to think of another concert that you could go to, one in the upper right-hand corner. If you're a fan of that particular composer or that particular band, what are you supposed to do there? What actions are you supposed to display in that particular instance? In both cases, you're listening to music, but I'm guessing most of you would assume that sorry, you're supposed to act in very different ways in those wow. Sorry again. In those two particular events. In fact, most of you might assume that your behavior in the bottom right-hand corner event is more indicative of what you would do in the lower left-hand corner event. Even though watching a football game is theoretically very different from watching a concert. These comparisons, these ideas of what you would do, all relate to how you react to the cues that you're getting from your social environment. I mean, the fact that most of you know what you should do means that you understand an idea of something that we most of the time take for granted. This particular idea is something we call conformity, or kind of bending our behavior in order to fit the roles of others. So, the expectations of others. So if I'm in a group and I see a group doing something, social psychologists have found many, many times over, and numerous studies have been done over the decades, is that more often than not, we have a tendency to bend our behavior, even bend our thoughts, due to the presence of others. Sometimes this presence can actually be felt where we're surrounded by others. But we also found in other studies that just anticipating that others are watching or near can be sufficient to get us to change our behaviors and get us to conform in one way or another. When we're talking about how we conform, there's another major term that we have to understand. It's this idea of something called norms. Social standards that are set by a group that entice us to act a specific way or teach us how to act appropriately. So when you looked at the concerts, you knew there were norms with each of those particular events. And usually your behavior aligns with those specific norms. We know it works, but one of the questions that psychologists have asked is, what causes people to be so compelled to look for norms and to conform to the group when they find themselves in it? One of the first people to try to answer this question was a researcher named Muzafer Sharif. What Sharif argued is that when we look at conformity, maybe what's going on is that people are finding themselves in situations where they don't necessarily know what the correct thing to do actually is. And he tried to prove that this might be the case by creating a very kind of cute experiment that operated on a perceptual effect that most people didn't know much about. This particular effect was called the autokinetic effect. And the way it works is if I take you, place you in a completely dark room, and turn on a light, and have you stare at that light for a long period of time, what will happen is, even if that light doesn't move, you will start to perceive it as moving. Your eyes will move a little bit, your head will move a little bit, because you can't attribute that motion to anything in the environment, because there's no other cues for you to use. You automatically assume that that perception of movement has to be because the light itself is moving. But what's really interesting with the autokinetic effect is the fact that even though all people see this movement, almost all people see this movement, the amount of movement they see varies. So one person might see the light moving 2 inches, 3 inches, 4 inches in multiple sessions, while another person could be seeing it move 10 inches, 12 inches, 11 inches. These differences in perception, though, was exactly what Sharif wanted to tap into. So what he would do in his study was he would have participants come in and report how much they thought a light was moving in this autokinetics effect study when they were on their own. After creating a baseline where people would come to about a set standard movement, so somebody would say on average it moved 5 inches, another person would say on average it moved 2 inches, and a third person might say on average it moved 12 inches. He'd then take these 3 people, or 4 people, or 2 people, however many he wanted in these different sets of studies, and combine them into a room together, and have them report how much they thought it moved while in the presence of others. And what he found was really interesting. Even though each person had their own set idea of how much it moved on their own, when paired up with each other, they started perceiving it as moving the exact same amount. So the person who saw it moving 2 inches on average started inching up, getting to 5 or 6 inches. The person who saw it move 12 inches on average when they were alone started moving down, and saw it eventually move to 5 or 6 inches. Where the person who was kind of in the middle stayed exactly where they were. And these alterations in perceptions were not something that people attributed in this experiment to the others around them. In fact, they argued that maybe this new light moved a special amount. What was really interesting for Sharif was the fact that when he separated them, their conformity remained. So the person that saw it moving 2 or 3 inches before they were ever paired with anybody, for the rest of the time when they were in that experiment, continued to see that movement of about 2 to 3 or 5 to 6 inches when they were alone. This effect was what Sharif argued is exactly how conformity works. We find ourselves in a situation where we don't know what to do, so we look to others to find norms, to create norms, so we can maintain our behavior in an appropriate way, so we can kind of come to the right conclusion about what to do, because theoretically there's never really a right answer as to what to do. This idea was very widely accepted by social psychologists. And then another researcher kind of threw a major wrench into this idea. That particular researcher's name was Solomon Asch. And what he argued was that yes, conformity probably does increase in ambiguous situations. There's no doubt about it. Sharif's experiment was very, very solid. But he said, well, what happens with unambiguous situations? What happens when we know what the right answer is? So what he did was he created an experiment that asked people to do something very simple. And we judged the lengths of lines. So he would have a test line like the one on the left, and he would ask people, which line is that test line most like? Line 1, 2, or 3? Now, I'm guessing most of you, if you're looking at this and paying attention, can say with absolute certainty, it's obviously line 2. What Asch wanted to find was if there was any way he could make people change their response. In essence, get them to conform to the group when there is such a right answer. When he found what he did, his results were really, really groundbreaking. And they really shattered the social conformity society's concept of why we do the things we do. So please, pause this presentation, go to the YouTube video, and watch a recreation of Solomon Asch's line study so you can see why this was such an unbelievably interesting study when it was run at its time. After that, you can move on to the next slide. Now, what you should have seen in this Asch study is that conformity happened for a number of different reasons. One of the reasons why it could have happened was because people just felt compelled to fit in with the group, even though they knew that the group was actually wrong. When this occurs, we call this behavior public compliance. Namely, people are conforming because even though they don't necessarily believe what the group is doing or saying, they feel this stress, this idea that they need to be a part of the group. This desire to have people in the group like us, to be a part of the group, is something we call normative social influence. Namely, our desire to be a part of the group can sometimes just change what we do, make us do things that we don't normally do. But Ash also said that theoretically there could be a number of people, because they assumed that there were so many people giving the wrong answer, indicating that they possibly were the ones who were wrong. So some people, he thought, are actually committing what's called private acceptance. We saw this in the first person that got it wrong. There's so many people giving the different answer in their mind. They have to be wrong. They have to be the ones that are misperceiving the event. And Ash said in his study, some people did, even after they were told that the group was wrong, struggle to realize where the group went wrong. They just were so convinced that many people they were paired with couldn't possibly be wrong. Ash proposed that this happens all the time. We follow the group numerous times in our day or in our environment, but we do it for different reasons. Sometimes just to fit in, sometimes because we truly believe those groups we're a part of are infallible, that they can't possibly be wrong in some of the activities that they're doing. This idea also led Ash to start asking, if this is the case, how can we strengthen some of the effects that we find? Two of the things that were discussed in the video was the fact that having an ally can greatly decrease the need for conformity. Namely, if everybody's giving the same answer, our ability to resist the group is greatly weakened. So in a study, about 35 to 40% of participants caved to the group when there was nobody else that gave an alternate answer. But the first second somebody gave an alternate answer, the first second an ally was present, conformity dropped to below 10%. This was a major factor in Ash's idea of what causes conformity. That uniform group was absolutely essential to increase conformity within an individual. Another thing that's required is that you have to have a fairly substantial group. If I'm paired up with just one other person, the odds of me conforming to that one person giving the wrong answer is exceptionally low. If there's two people giving the wrong answer, I'm not very likely to conform. But if three people give the wrong answer, then typically I'm at pretty much my maximum level of conformity. In fact, we give this particular effect a special name. Ash called it the magic number 3, because it seemed to be the critical number, the critical mass number that was required to get people to start to want to be a part of the group, to associate with the group, and really start to conform to the norms that the group sets. So, two of the major factors, again, was having an ally and how many people were in the majority. But there's other stuff that Ash later studied that brought out more information on what entices people to conform, well, encourages others not to conform. One of the things that he discovered was that the importance of the group to a person had a big impact on whether or not they were going to conform. If they were with people they really valued or they really liked, conformity shot through the roof. If they were with people that they didn't necessarily like or maybe they didn't even respect, then conformity was fairly low. When we're talking about group members, another big thing that sometimes popped up was whether or not an expert was present. Now, there was no professional line judger that was ever embedded into the experiment, but when participants were paired with, say, instructors or people that were seen as authority figures, this tended to increase the amount of conformity that people displayed. And what's even more interesting is the fact that when people were encouraged to be accurate, when they were told accuracy is a must, these experts had an even more profound effect on the individual. In fact, more often than not, people conformed more when they were told that they had to be right and they were paired with other individuals. If the group also had specific instructions presented to them, like they needed to be fast in their responses, or everybody needed to give the same response, again, conformity increased. What's also interesting with Ash's studies is when we've started replicating them across other cultures, The cultural dynamics of a group can greatly impact our likelihood of conforming. In individualist cultures, Western cultures, what we see is that people conform pretty much an even amount, maybe a little bit more with people they like or people they know, but pretty much an even amount across different groups. In collectivistic cultures, or East Asian cultures, again, this effect varies depending upon the groups that people are in. In East Asian cultures, when a person's with people they really know, they really like, conformity shoots through the roof. But in an East Asian culture, when a person's with complete strangers, people they don't like or people they don't know, they almost never conform. In fact, conformity is much lower for people from those societies when they're with these groups than they are in comparison to people from Western societies. And what this tells us again is that some part of conformity, some part of our desire to fit in with a group and behave in accordance with what everybody else is doing, is something we learn along the way. And some people learn to conform to everybody, while others learn to conform to only specific types of individuals. We're still trying to grapple with this particular idea, but it's another added effect that kind of gives another nuance to how this concept of conformity works. Now, one of the questions that you might be asking when we talk about this idea of conformity is, how far can it go? And if we can get people to lie about the lengths of lines, is it just because it's really not dangerous? Because there's no real cost to conforming? Or can we create conforming or conformity in individuals when there are actual costs? Well, what I'd like you to do for the second half of this class is watch a rather extensive video. And this one that you're going to be watching is a recreation of an original study done by Stanley Milgram about 60 years ago. The title of his original video was called Obedience. It's given the same name, but again, it's done many, many years after Milgram did his original study. But nonetheless, even though it's done over, I believe, 30 years after Milgram did his original study in the 50s, the results are still the same. What it shows us is that conformity can emerge in very unexpected places. And it can tell us a lot about how programmed we are as human beings to try to fit into the group and to follow, in this particular case, authoritative figures telling us what to do. A word of caution, this video can be sometimes disturbing and upsetting to individuals, but it does give us a glimpse into human nature and how far some of us might go if the right instructions are given to us. So please, click on the top link, the second link, and then the third link, and watch those videos in succession, because it's a 3-part video that you have to watch all 3 of to get the real gist or the real implication of what this study was about. Afterward, move on to the last slide so we can just prep you for the upcoming exam. Alright, if you've seen that obedience video, you're now at the very end of the material that's going to be covered for this particular section. There's a lot to study here. Again, lots of terminology that we've covered. So if you've got questions about anything or any concerns for the upcoming exam, please email me. Otherwise, good luck in your studies. I wish you all the best, and I'll be pulling for you in the exams in the upcoming days. Take care. Make sure you get those submissions in as soon as you can. Bye.